Facebook right now, and Robin, there we go. All right. So I am Terry Camersell, and I'm here on behalf of Creation Fellowship Santee. We are a group of friends who love to learn about our Creator God and believe that the Bible, when read properly, disproves Darwinian evolution. We've been meeting on this online platform since May of 2020. Since meeting online, we've been blessed with over 100 individual speakers. Our mission statement is 1 Peter 3:15, always be ready to give an answer for the hope that lies within you. You can find most of our past presentations by visiting tinyurl.com/CFS archives. That's C like creation, F like fellowship, S like Santee, and the word archives. This week, we're welcoming Dr. Alan White of Canopy Ministries. Dr. White earned his bachelor's in chemistry from the University of Tennessee and his PhD in organic chemistry from Harvard University in 1981. Included in his career achievements are 45 U.S. patents, and he's the author of 18 scientific publications. After working 30 years for Eastman Chemical Company, Dr. White retired in 2011 so he could devote more time to studying the Bible and speaking around the world on the topic of creation science. Dr. White is also a Logos Research Associate and an adjunct speaker for Answers in Genesis. Tonight, he'll be answering the question, is human life the result of the random organization of chemicals, or did God create us in his image? And with that, I'm happy to turn it over to you, Dr. White.
All right. Thank you very much. Let's see. Can you see my screen or not?
Yes, we can.
Okay, very good. Okay, well, it's a pleasure to be with you tonight. I really enjoy speaking about this subject in particular because it fits with my training about as well as any. But could life have come from lifeless chemicals by chance? Um, just a minute. Hang on a second, Terry. I'm having trouble. There we go. There we go. Now I've got it going. And of course, as you well know, the majority of you, I'm sure, the Bible says no. The Bible says that God created everything, but the thing that may surprise you is that I'm convinced that the scientific data also say no, that that life could not have started from lifeless chemicals, and that's what I'm going to try to convince you of tonight. And the other thing I want to remind you of is that life is a precious gift from God. And so we're going to look at that in more detail as we go. But why is this issue important? It's important for a lot of reasons, but one is that what you believe about the origin of life affects how you value life. And so whether it's this kind of life in the womb or whether it's this kind of life, one I'm getting more close to now. This is Jean Calment. This was a picture of her on her 121st birthday. She's now passed away. I think the oldest person in the world now is about 118, something like that. But if you believe that you're just a random collocation of atoms and that you have no real value, then these forms of life are also going to be considered less valuable. And we see that in our society, and I'm going to talk about that some more. But I just want you to make sure that you understand that what we believe about the origin of life affects how we value life on this earth. Of course, the Bible says that life comes from life. Forgive me, these are my grandchildren down here at the bottom. Life from my wife and I through our children, now to our grandchildren. John 5:26 says, just as the Father has life in himself, even he gave to the Son also to have life in himself. And then also the Spirit of God has made me, and the breath of the Almighty gives me life. And so we see that the Father has life. He gave it to the Son. There's also life in the Spirit, and we are beneficiaries of all of that. One other verse that I enjoy, again, my grandchildren, but then the Lord God formed the man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. and man became a living creature. And so God breathed into us the breath of life. Of course, I mean, if you look at science also says that life comes from life. Louis Pasteur did experiments that I'm sure you're familiar with years ago in the mid 1800s, showing that uh, that life didn't spontaneously come out of rotting meat, that was flies from the eggs of flies, and that he called that concept of life from life, called it biogenesis. And of course, evolution requires abiogenesis, life from non-living chemicals. And so, but there's even a word in science, biogenesis, talking about life from life. So the question is tonight, did life begin by a supernatural process, pictured here by the Michelangelo's portrait, or did life come by a natural process where simple chemicals organize themselves somehow into more complex chemicals, and those more complex chemicals continued to organize themselves and came alive somehow? And so that is the secular theory of how we came to life. But I want to encourage you that you are not an accident. You are a precious creation of God. The secular view of life is this, that we are just a random collection of atoms assembled by chance. We decide if we have any purpose, and we decide what that purpose is. There is no external standard by which to determine right from wrong. The strongest or the loudest get to decide what happens. Uh, we assert what we want to be true and expect others to believe it, whether it aligns with reality or not. And death is the end. Um, Biblical view of life, of course, is totally the opposite of that. We are made in the image of God, therefore we have value. We're created in Christ Jesus for good works. He has given us a purpose in life to follow in the footsteps that he wants us to follow. God has written his law on our hearts, so we have an internal morality. We don't always follow that moral guidance, but we have it. And physical death is not the end. Followers of Christ believe in eternal life with him. Life has become less valuable to those in our society. Let me just give you a few statistics. This one really shocked me. Suicide rates have increased almost 30% in the last 18 years in the United States, according to the Centers for Disease Control. That to me is really shocking, but an indication of people's view of life, I think. Abortions are now allowed in New York State, even to the point of birth. And laws permitting euthanasia are on the rise. You may not realize this, but 9 states in the United States now permit assisted suicide. Again, it's something that was shocking to me. Um, I want you to think about it for just a minute as to how would you define life? It's one of those things where most people would say, well, if I see it, I can tell you whether it's life or not. But if you try to think of a way to define it, it's not as easy as you might think. And so I tried to find a secular scientific definition of life, and this is the best one I could find, okay, is this. Life is a self-sustaining chemical system capable of Darwinian evolution. Okay, now this is a NASA definition, all right? You are a self-sustaining chemical system. I hope that makes you feel really warm and fuzzy tonight. Okay, it doesn't me, but maybe it does you. But a capable of Darwinian evolution, which is an interesting twist on this. But even those scientists who are making these definitions realized that they weren't doing a very good job in making a definition. And so they decided maybe it's better if we just talk about what can living things do. All right. And so that's what they've kind of settled on. And they say, well, living things metabolize things. They convert food into energy. And certainly our bodies do that. We convert a number of different um, types of food into energy for our bodies to use. We don't even think about it. It happens every day. One thing though is I bought a biochemistry textbook, a college textbook, just to see what they were saying these days. And on some of the very first few pages in the textbook was a word called homeostasis, which means that living things control their internal conditions. And if you think about it, your body controls a whole raft of things. Your body controls its temperature. Your body controls the pH of your blood. If it didn't, you wouldn't survive if it didn't tightly control that. Matter of fact, your body has layer upon layer upon layer of control systems that does that. But if you think about that, that fact alone should tell you that that system was designed and created and not a result of evolution. Other things bodies can do, they can respond to stimuli, um, they can grow and develop. You think about that, that's not as easy as you might think. Your bones, your muscles, your blood vessels, your nerves, they all kind of grow at the same rate, more or less. And so uh, that's really a fascinating thing to think about. But the most complicated thing that living things do is reproduce. Okay. Um, Matter of fact, only living things reproduce in that sense. And we're going to talk about that a good deal more as the evening goes on. But I want you to just remember that the living things do all these things. Um, and all these systems that do these things all work well and work together. And so that's what a living individual does. Okay. Um, and so, what is the secular theory of life? The secular scientists say that life began on Earth about 3.8 billion years ago. The Earth, they say, is 4.54 billion years old, and that life began somehow when water showed up miraculously about 3.8 billion years ago. The claim is that life must have begun with a molecule that is simple enough to have been made from simple chemicals on the early Earth, yet complicated enough to reproduce. Uh, there is no known molecule that remotely fits that definition. As a matter of fact, uh, things, we can't even make things that can reproduce on purpose. We can't on purpose make something that reproduces. So, how in the world would an accidental process result in something that could reproduce? And simple chemicals, I can tell you from working in the laboratory for years, chemicals don't make themselves and they don't reproduce. I had to work hard in the lab to make those chemicals. And so that's just preposterous, basically. And this is a quote that I found from a very famous organic chemist, George Whitesides. He's a professor at Harvard, organic chemist, a really good one, a professor of organic chemistry, and he has worked in origin of life research for many, many years. And here's a quote from Dr. Whitesides. He began this way. Most chemists, now I'm not one of these most chemists, but he says most chemists believe, as I do, that life emerged spontaneously from mixtures of molecules in the prebiotic earth. And then he says this: how? I have no idea. On the basis of all the chemistry that I know, it seems to me astonishingly improbable. And I put that emphasis on there. Well, he has no idea how life would have begun from chemicals, and it seems to him to be astonishingly improbable. But he has great faith to believe that that's how it happened, still yet. And so, but to me that was fascinating. And so where does life begin? Some people say that it began in a warm little pond. I'm sure you've heard that. Other people would say that it began in a black smoker at the bottom of the oceans where the lava is near the bottom of the ocean and warm water comes up with a bunch of minerals and that reactions come about. Of course, you have a lot of thermal energy, and so you can make a lot of different chemicals, but you can also degrade a lot of different chemicals under those same conditions. Others say, well, life must have begun in Antarctica in ice. And so, well, you don't have much energy and to generate many molecules down there. If you made some, they might hang around because there's not a lot of energy to grade them either. But people have proposed all kinds of ways of locations that life could have come on Earth, but there's no convincing evidence out there for any of that. My favorite, though, is panspermian. For those of you that are not familiar with that word, what that word means is that life began on another planet and was somehow transported to Earth on a meteorite or an asteroid or something. And so life somehow came into being on another planet and somehow rode on an asteroid through cold, dark space, survived that, survived reentry and the heat of reentry, landed on Earth and started life on Earth. And so, as you can tell, of course, I'm a bit skeptical about that. I mean, why would life have begun anywhere else? You'd still have to explain how life began somewhere else to begin with, and then somehow believe that it could have transported itself to Earth. But a lot of people, this shows you, in my mind, the desperation of people because there's so little evidence of how life could have come from lifeless chemicals. They're willing to accept almost any explanation, even if it doesn't make much sense. So at least that's my interpretation of what goes on. So lifeless molecules, could they come to life? Here's some simple molecules that might have been present on an early Earth if there were such a thing. Here's ammonia and water and phosphoric acid and methane. Uh, but you somehow have to get from those simple chemicals to something like this. That's hemoglobin on the top, a highly complex protein. So not only do you have to make big molecules, you have to make specific big molecules to have any hope of creating a life. And so you can see how complex hemoglobin is here. You look at the bottom and you see DNA, the structure where all the information or a lot of the information for life is held. Again, a very complicated, pretty unstable molecule, really, that's in a double helix there that contains a specific information. Again, a highly complicated, highly specific molecule. And so it would be miraculous if either one of those molecules were there. But hemoglobin, you don't need just one protein, you need tens of thousands of proteins, and you need a DNA sequence that's 3 billion letters long for 3 billion pairs of letters long for a human being. And so even if you had those complicated molecules, could you get life? The simplest life. And of course, there is no such thing as simple life, okay? But the simplest life, something like a bacteria. Um, no, look at how complex that is. Look at how many complicated parts that bacteria has. As a matter of fact, if you took a bacteria and separated all its parts, it wouldn't even reassemble. Even if you had all of the parts that you needed for a cell in a test tube, it wouldn't even reassemble into a living cell. And so, can lifeless chemicals come to life? My conviction is that it's not possible, and we'll go into a lot more detail as we go on here. Again, in that textbook that I found, that biochemistry textbook that I found, in the first part was the homeostasis word. Buried in the near the end of the book was a chapter on the origin of life. And they spent many pages on this. And they said in the beginning of that chapter, they go, the question of the origin of life immediately poses a conundrum. Okay. And they spent the next 7 or 8 pages trying to explain what that conundrum was. And I summarized it here in one sentence. Basically, if it takes DNA to make a protein and it takes proteins to make DNA, then how do you get started? Okay. And so they struggle with this because, as I showed you on the previous slide, you need both enzymes as structurally and to catalyze reactions, and you also need information molecule of DNA. But in order to have life, you have to have both. And so they know how unlikely it is to make one highly complicated molecule. But now that you've required two even different types of highly complicated molecules, even the secular scientists are think that's a problem. Okay, and they don't know where it started. Did you start with DNA, or did you start with a protein? And I'll show you how that works later if my videos work. And so as I said, what are we made of? About 50% of your body weight, roughly, is proteins, either as enzymes or structural components. Your muscles, your hair, your skin, many, and even small amounts of in your bones. So there are a lot of proteins in your body structurally. And each one of those different kinds of proteins that are in your body has a different sequence of amino acids. So a protein is a linear, essentially linear uh, uh, array of amino acids condensed together. And they're long chains. There are several hundred amino acids linked together generally, and in a specific sequence. So the proteins in your hair have a different sequence than the ones in your muscles, and so on. And there are 20 different amino acids naturally occurring in your body. And so, and each protein, as I said, has a specific sequence of an amino acid. So, amino acid in position number one could be any one of 20 different amino acids. Likewise for position two and position three, all the way through the several hundred positions in there. And not only does the sequence have to be right, the protein has to be folded into the correct shape. And so, a highly complicated process. And one more thing, would this happen naturally? And the problem is that not in water, it doesn't. As a matter of fact, amino acids don't condense themselves in water. I mean, maybe two amino acids might link together, but hardly any more than that. And you need hundreds of amino acids to be linked together. And so water is the wrong solvent. Water is more likely to break a protein back down into the amino acids and not the other way around, which is what you need. Um, and so and so here's a picture of hemoglobin. I hope you can see that there. It's just a cartoon-like picture of hemoglobin. Um, and um, um, and as I said, each position of in the chain, there's a 1 in 20 chance of randomly getting that correct. Okay. And so let's just think about this for a minute. What are the chances of getting the first 20 amino acids of any protein correct? Okay, and so what would that be? Well, there's a 1 in 20 chance of getting the first one right. There's a 1 in 20 chance of getting the second one right. And so basically, um, you're quickly getting to a very big number. And this number here you see on the slide that starts with 105, it's roughly 105 trillion or something like that. It's a very big number. And that's just the chances of getting the first 20 amino acids right by a random process. Okay. And so, well, what would it be to get the entire hemoglobin right? Well, it would be 20 raised to the 575th power. Okay, because there are 575 amino acids in the hemoglobin protein. And so, as you can imagine, that's quite a big number. And here it is. Um, there's the number. It's one chance in that number of getting the sequence of hemoglobin correct. And before you try to waste your time counting those zeros, okay, there's 780 zeros. And that's an estimate. I had to estimate it because normal calculators can't handle a number that big. And so I had to find a formula that would estimate the number for me. And this is close. This is roughly what it would be for to get all 575 amino acids right. And this is only one protein. You need tens of thousands of proteins in your body at least for it to be functional. And so that's another reason I think there is essentially no chance of getting there. There's no chance of getting there by accident. Okay. And so that's just getting the sequence right. In order to get the fold right, you need another a different protein. They're called chaperonins, and these proteins are kind of barrel shaped. And these recently formed proteins go in there and are aided in folding, in a sense, providing an environment where they can fold and to take the shape that they need to be, to the shape they need to have to be active. And so not only do you have to have the right sequence, you need another protein to help in the folding process to get the right shape of the protein. Okay. All right. There we go. Okay. Um, and there's one more thing I didn't tell you. As I said, there are 20 different amino acids that are in your body. It turns out 19 of those, all of them but glycine, um, come in two different forms. Okay, come in two different forms. One is, and there are different ways to think about this, but one good analogy is to think about right-handed and left-handed form. Okay, and so here we see it. You see the molecules, the same atoms are there. They're all, the four substituents are connected to the central carbon. They're just spatially connected in a different way. And so almost all their physical properties are the same, except for how they rotate polarized light. Okay, and so these are two. And so in a random process, if I went in the laboratory and tried to make an amino acid, I would make exactly 50% half right-handed and half left-handed amino acids. And so that would be the natural situation where I would have both. But in your body, that's not what we see. We see all left-handed amino acids. Every one of the amino acids in your body is left-handed. Uh, Something that would not have come about by chance, but something that's required if you're going to make molecules that have exactly the right shape that they need to do the chemical processes that are in your body. You have to have a specific orientation. And if you were to replace left-handed amino acids with some right-handed amino acids in your proteins, they wouldn't work. And so miraculously, God made it specifically, made them all left-handed. And your DNA, the sugars in your DNA are all right-handed, just by the chemical convention that organic chemists use. Okay, proteins would not have formed naturally for all the reasons that we just talked about. They wouldn't be in the right sequence. They wouldn't be folded in the right shape. They wouldn't all be left-handed, um, um, and they wouldn't even condense in water. So there are many reasons that the proteins that you need for your body would not have come about naturally. Here's Stanley Miller. This is a famous Urey-Miller experiment that you may have heard of, where he put simple organic chemicals in there, put lightning, simulated lightning in there by a spark, and made some chemicals and claimed to make some amino acids. Of course, the amino acids that he made were an equal mixture of right and left-handed amino acids. Uh, and so while people have been able to make by brute force, make some of the chemicals of life, they haven't come anywhere near making them in a way that could have happened on the early Earth. And so those experiments really don't prove anything in a sense of anywhere near getting to life. And so I put it this way, just for fun. Some people believe you put enough energy into anything and they'll come to life, right? With this picture from Young Frankenstein, the movie, and there's Frankenstein on the table, supposedly dead, and enough energy, and he'll come to life. Well, that's not how chemistry works. The energy is fine, but you have to have molecular machines to make it useful, to make that energy be useful for your body. Okay. Let me move on. Let's see quickly. Yeah. Let me talk just a minute about DNA. The DNA is where the instructions for how your body can makes itself is in your DNA. There, as I said, there are 3 billion letters. In your body, there are about 30 trillion, yes, with a T, 30 trillion cells. And each one of those cells has your DNA in it, your specific DNA in it. Um,
The job of this
I hope you
mRNA
can
is to
see
carry the
this.
gene's message from the DNA out of the nucleus to a ribosome
Just a minute.
for
I hope you can still hear me.
No, we can't hear the video anymore, but we do hear you.
Okay. Let's see.
I think you clicked the mute on the video.
I'm going to presume you can. I'm going to turn this back off in a minute. This is a ribosome that's taking the information from the DNA and making the protein. The protein here is in red. And you can see that there it relaxes and comes loose. Here's the information from messenger RNA from the nucleus. The ribosome clamps around it. It reads the codons 3 at a time there, and they match up with these transfer RNAs to get the red dot on there is the amino acid. Okay, and that amino acid is put into the protein sequence, and so that's how the information from the DNA is. You see how complicated it is here, incredibly complicated, and so um, um, to me, this is just incredible as to how the DNA works.
a molecule.
Oop. Let me move on.
The larger
Okay. And so I'm hoping you can hear me again if you weren't before, but that just wanted to show you how complicated it is for making proteins, and how the information from your DNA is used to get the protein sequence exactly right, so that the proteins have exactly the right sequence so that they can be functional in your body. The DNA has that exact right sequence programmed into it. As Werner Getz says here, there is no known law of nature, no known process, and no known sequence of events which can cause information to originate uh, by itself within matter. And so there's no random process that generates information. And that's what would have to happen in an evolutionary sense because more complicated life forms require more information. And the only way to get that is from a mind, not from a random process. And so the DNA, your DNA is all in all your different 215 different kinds of cells, bone cells, nerve cells, muscle cells, blood cells, reproductive cells, and the same DNA sequence that's in the same sequence is in all your cells, but it tells each cell how to be the kind of cell it's supposed to be. Again, I just want to bring you back to reproduction, okay, as the thing that really sets life apart from anything else, that only living things reproduce. Um, and that I challenge you to think about anything that you could make that could make more of itself. I mean, I just put this kind of cartoon in for you. This is not how new cars are made, okay? They don't come out of the trunk of older cars, particularly not a Mustang coming out of a Toyota, I think here. And so cars don't make more cars. Cars are made in car factories, but car factories don't make more car factories. And so things don't reproduce themselves. Um, even we can't even do that on purpose. And so the scientists would say, come about by accident. Okay. And so
During DNA
Okay.
replication, both
let me back up again and let me just show you real quick. I don't know whether you're going to be able to hear the audio on this or not, but
Dr. Allen,
yeah,
can you hear
yeah,
me? Yeah,
yes,
we can hear the video.
you can hear the video. Can you hear the comments on it, or do you hear me?
Oh, we hear the video, them talking, and then but you muted it, and then we could hear you talking, and we watched the video, and it was pretty cool.
Great, cool. I'll do that again then. So what this video is, thank you, Terry. What this video is how, if you're going to make another cell or you're going to make another individual, another human being, you've got to copy the DNA. Okay. That is no small task. The secular scientists say, well, that just happens by accident. Okay. Well, it doesn't. Okay. And let me just show you how complicated copying DNA is. Okay. And here we go. Okay.
during DNA replication, both
Okay. And so what has to happen for DNA to be copied is that at first you have to unwind the helix, and that's what's going on there to the left with that little blue enzyme that you see there. That's called helicase. It is separating. You see there, strands coming in from the lower left, going into the helicase, separating the two strands, separating it about 10,000 revolutions per minute, faster than your car can turn. What I didn't tell you is that the DNA is not actually parallel like this, but it's anti-parallel in the way it's wound together. And so the copying mechanism has to copy one of the strands of DNA in the direction it's coming. On the other strand, it has to turn it around backwards. You're going to see a big loop in here. It's going to turn it around backwards and then feed it back in. It's an incredibly complicated process, and most of what you see here is only about a third or to half of the number of enzymes that are actually required to do this process. You see the helicase here splitting it. You see the DNA polymerase there. You see what's called the leading strand. That's one being copied in the forward direction. There now you see the one being copied in the reverse direction, called an Okazaki fragment. These videos are both done by the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. What amazes me is that the people that did these videos believe that this all happened by evolution. I can't imagine that. But this loop is called an Okazaki fragment. It's copied backwards and fed back in to the DNA. And so this is the kind of complexity it takes to copy a molecule, to reproduce a molecule in a sense. And so I just challenge you to show this to anybody and say, well, could this have happened by chance? To me, it's astounding that anybody could believe that something this complicated. Just look at the choreography of the enzymes going in and out and doing their part and getting in and out of the way. To me, it's just fascinating to look at and to think about how God did that, how he does that, and how he designed it all to work together brilliantly. And so, all right, let me turn that back up. Okay. And so when I see that, I think about this verse, but Jesus looked at them and said, with man, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible. That's the verse that comes to my mind when I look at DNA replication. Um, without God, life on earth should be completely unexpected. Okay. There's no reason to expect that any functional protein would be made by a random process. There's no reason to expect that a DNA molecule full of all that correct information would be made by a natural process. And there's no reason to expect that a group of specific complex molecules would do all the things that life has to do, including reproduction. And so to me, you look at lifeless chemicals and say, could those things do the complex things that are required for life? And I don't see how anybody could believe that they did. And a matter of fact, even Dr. Whitesides himself says he has no idea how it would have happened. Okay. Um, uh, and just remember this verse. This is when Paul was speaking in Athens at the Areopagus, talking to the Greeks, and he says, the God who made the world and everything in it being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. So that's, I think, yeah, this is the last. This I want to end up. I want to end up with this. You are not an accident. We were all made by God in His image, and we're all valuable to Him because we're made in His image. He's given us a purpose and a meaning for our lives. His law is written on our hearts, and we have a clear sense of right and wrong. We know what we ought to do. We don't always do it, but we know what we ought to do. And life is a precious gift from God. All right. Well, Terry, that's where I want to end it tonight. I'll be glad to answer whatever questions people have.
Thank you, Dr. Allen. That was great. This is Robin. And
Stop sharing, I guess. Is that right?
yes, if you would, then there we go.
All right.
So we have a few questions in the chat, but I'm gonna, as always, ask mine first because they're the most
Okay.
important.
There you go.
Just kidding. Just
Uh,
kidding. I'm looking for it here. So, I'm an engineer. I'm not a complete dummy or anything, but I hear a lot about DNA,
mhm.
and those videos were very cool. I really enjoyed those videos,
Okay.
especially with your commentary track. But where is that happening inside a human?
Oh, whereas which? Oh, either one of those. They're happening they're inside a cell, but outside the nucleus. Okay, and so both of those things are happening inside the cell, inside basically every cell. Matter of fact, in terms of the first one where the protein was being made, what the DNA does is tell each cell which proteins it needs to make and how many it needs to make. And so that protein synthesis, I'm pretty sure goes on inside the cell, but not in the nucleus. And then the DNA replication actually also happens outside the nucleus. The DNA that's in the nucleus is protected in the nucleus. And so what a cell does is something crazy complicated. It makes some messenger RNA, which goes outside the nucleus. That was the first part of that video where it went through a hole.
Right. I saw that.
Saw that. So that was the messenger RNA going outside the nucleus, and then the ribosome, which is in the intercellular part inside the cell, but outside the nucleus. And it clamped around that messenger RNA and read the information from the messenger RNA and then transferred that almost like a Rosetta Stone, if you will, transferred that and took the next amino acid and added it to the chain. Okay. That's an incredible, I mean, the video, it looks incredibly complicated, but it's even more complicated than it looks on that video. Okay. To link those amino acids together, to read all that, it's just incredible. And then the copying of the DNA, of course, anytime you're going to divide a cell, make two cells from one, you've got to copy both strands of the DNA so that you have two DNA helices to separate. So there's one for each of the two new cells. Does that make sense?
Yes. And do you think that the mutations come in that copying?
Now there are, that's a great question. I mean, let's look at the DNA for just a minute. So you've got 3 billion letters that you need to copy. Well, 3 billion pairs of letters. So in a sense, 6 billion things that need to be copied. There are occasionally mistakes in there, but very, very rarely are there mistakes in the copying mechanism. The mutations come more from chemicals in our environment, sunlight, other kinds of things. But even just inside your cell, um, your your DNA is being damaged all day, every day,
Oh yeah, no, yeah, I know that.
but it turns out that it's an important point though. It turns out that there are DNA repair mechanisms DNA repair enzymes inside your body that are working to repair those mistakes day in and day out. And if you think about, but to me, the important point is if you think about where did those DNA repair enzymes come from? If they weren't there from day one, people wouldn't have survived because you can't survive without those DNA repair mechanisms, those DNA repair enzymes. And so they would have had to have been there along with everything else in the beginning so that life could have continued. And
Oh,
so,
that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
yeah.
Terry, that was my question. Do you want to go ahead and get the ones out of the chat?
Sure, I would be happy to do that. So, Bill says not to play the role of the evolutionist advocate again. Jesus, again. But in theory, how crazy would it be to suggest that only the left-handed molecules could survive all these biologic processes, whereas the right-handed could never fit into these required reactions or biological processes?
Okay, good question. If you're gonna start with that, you've got to somehow have gotten pure one or the other of the amino acids to begin with. Okay. I mean, the real problem when you're trying to solve this problem of getting there naturally is that you've got to somehow start by some kind of purification process, which really isn't available. I mean, now people have proposed all kinds of different mechanisms to purify one relative to the other. The problem is that they're equally reactive, except for when they're reacting with another molecule that's already that it would have to be already purified and it's right-handed or left-handed. It would need to be a pure right-handed or left-handed molecule to react. That's the only way there'd be any difference in the reaction rate. And so right-handed and left-handed molecules react at the same rate with anything else that's not right-handed or left-handed. And so so basically your problem is you'd have to somehow come up with a way of separating right-handed from left-handed, and that's a real challenge to do. Really don't know how to do it.
That was Bill likes to play the advocate. He does that well.
Okay, I mean I like skeptical questions. That it helps people understand a lot of times.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't seem like we have very many questions tonight. So why don't we go ahead and wrap up our public time? Can you tell people about your ministry, Canopy Ministries, and let them know how they can find you and your work?
Sure. Just Canopy Ministries, one word, .org. And my bio is on there. Some of the presentations that I have are on there, and so that'd probably be the best way to find for them to find a bio. They could also look at Logos Research Associates. I think I have a bio on there too, but and so that would be two places you could look, and you could and you can find stuff on Answers in Genesis too. I've written some things for them, and so if they want to look at other things that I've written. Matter of fact, one thing I forgot to say is that if people want more information about the talk I gave today, the Glass House: Shattering the Myth of Evolution. That's a book from the Answers in Genesis folks. Chapter
Mhm.
11 is a lot of what I talked about today is in chapter 11, and there's more information in there about the origin of life. So if you want more information on this, I get the book. If you, I don't get royalties from that, and so it's not going to help me for you to buy it, but I'm glad for you to buy it if you want more information, and you can probably even search it on the AIG website and get the chapter. But yeah, there's more information on there if you want to know more about the origin of life there.
All right. And once again, we are Creation Fellowship Santee, and you can find a list of our upcoming speakers by going to tinyurl.com/CF Santee, C like creation, F like fellowship, and Santee is spelled Santee. And in 2 weeks, we'll be having the I believe that we call her the elephant lady, Yolanda Pretorius, and she'll be talking about her her story of going from an evolutionist to a creationist. So you won't want to miss that, March 3rd. That's not the right date. It's not
March
March 3rd.
13th. It's
Thank
March
you,
13th.
March 13th. All right, with that, we're going to go ahead and sign off for tonight.